So as a continuation of the PyScript series, today I'm going to show you something that has been requested a lot of times over the last 2 to 3 weeks, and that is building interactive maps on the web. In the past, I've taught students how to do this using Shiny in conjunction with Leaflet.js. So if you see something on my screen right now, like the Leaflet.js, it looks very familiar to you if you've done that before. And in the past, you would have done that using Flask app or using Shiny, and you incorporate Leaflet into it, and then you link that up with one of the map data providers such as OpenStreetMap, etc. But since the launch of PyScript, and since this is what the channel is about, the series is about, I've thought of redoing some of these old videos or some of these old courses and leverage on PyScript and some of these new technologies, making it even easier to build interactive maps and data visualizations. And as a bonus, it also makes deployment a lot easier, since it's all front-end work anyway, right? And if you work in the data science or analytics domain, you will at some point be asked to do some geo-visualization, and you may just out of habit, habitually reach out for Leaflet and Flask, Shiny, but hopefully with this video you get to add an extra tool, an extra option in your toolkit. Now if you're new here, I make long-form programming videos and tutorials that span across Python, JavaScript, R, Solidity, front-end, back-end, computer vision, all kind of stuff that I find fun. If that's your idea of fun as well, then subscribe to the channel and check out the rest of the PyScript series, because we're in the 5th installment now. And if you have video ideas or requests, leave them in the comment section. Now enough with the intro, let's dive in. So the package we're going to be looking at is called Folium. Now Folium itself is a Python package built to harness the power of the incredibly popular Leaflet.js library. It allows you to work with maps and building interactive maps. This allows data scientists like yourself to collect data from web sources, wrangle them, shape them, and then visualize it all in Python, all in a Leaflet map without even touching JavaScript. So to get started, let's open up our terminal. I have that on my screen now, so that should be the first thing to do anyway. So let's just pip install Folium and wait for the installation process to complete. It's going to take a while here. And now it's done. Let's clear the screen so we have more space to work with. And I could verify that by doing a pip list to make sure that it's already been installed, but I'm not going to worry about that. You can clear the screen. And then we want to create a directory on your desktop or wherever you want. So I'm currently in my desktop, pwd, that's my current desktop. So I'm going to do it under PyFolium. So I'm going to say make directory PyFolium. That makes sense to me because it's kind of like a combination of PyScript and Folium. You can name it anything you want, alright? So I'm going to just say make directory, and I'm going to just say if that is done, then I want to open that up in code. So that's my Visual Studio Code. That's my favorite code editor. I don't know why you want to use something else. PyFolium, and then just open that up. Let's work from there. Okay, now that you have that open up, the rest should be pretty straightforward if you follow all the way up here. All the way to this point, right? So the whole series, we've gone through this multiple times already. So I want to just create a new file. So Control-N, say index.html. And now you have index.html. The rest is really straightforward. I'm just going to use emmet abbreviation. So emmet abbreviation is just going to create the scaffolding for you. You have the HTML tag, the head tag, the meta. So you're just going to put exclamation mark and then hit on tab. And that will just sort of give you the scaffolding, all right? And you can just hit tab a couple of times to move into title, and in the title we're just going to give it a simple name, just called interactive map in PyScript. All right, now I'm going to save this really quickly, and I'm going to just right click on this and say open with live server. Now if you follow up to this point in the series, this should be nothing new to you. If you don't know what I'm doing here with live server, there are multiple choices you can do this. You can either open up a Node.js server, you can set up something, either even using Python, you can do that with just configuring a development server or local server, or if you use Visual Studio Code, then you can just go ahead and install this extension called live server and then just open with live server. So I've spoken about this so many times before, I don't want to waste too much of your time just going through the same thing. So now you should open that up and you should see interactive map in PyScript. Make it a little bit cute. I'm gonna add a simple thing. I never really figured what this is called, emoji or emoticon or whatever. So just gonna add that in, save that, and we should see that, okay, now we have that appearing in our title, right? And the next couple of things are really standard stuff as well. You know what I'm gonna do next. I'm gonna just bring in PyScript, right? So you're gonna import the PyScript into it. So the first thing I want to do is to just the PyScript JavaScript is brought in, and then the CSS is brought in. So let's go ahead and say I can do this JavaScript first. So you say script, you say source. Now where's the source? You just have to search for it. So I kind of have it somewhere. I'm just gonna copy that PyScript.net/alpha. So reminding you that the alpha is still all in alpha. So reminding you that this is still in alpha, and close that. And we're just gonna add defer here to sort of not hold it back. So just go ahead and render the full thing, the DOM, do the DOM construction without having to worry about this being blocking. And then we're gonna bring the CSS in there. So how do we do that? We say link and link relation style sheet, and you want to put the same thing in here. So all we need to do is to just copy what we have in here. So copy all of that, paste it in here, and change this to CSS. right, at this for self-loading tag. Now I told you to install Folium earlier. You didn't even have to do that, because if you want to just do everything in here, you don't have to open up a Python terminal to sort of experiment with it. It's fine, but I'm gonna just have that open up as well, just to show you how it looks like in Python. But since we know that's going to be a dependency, so we might as well just create a dependency up front here. So we do that by using pyenv. We learned about this before. In fact, in all the PyScript videos that we've created up to this point, you see pyenv being declared up there. You can put them in the head, you can put them in the tail, even in the body, but generally I like to put them in the head. It's cleaner. It belongs, I think it belongs up there. It doesn't belong in the body. Body is where you know, what comes up on the DOM, on the actual web page itself. So I want to put this in the head, and so I'm going to say the first one is pandas. It's going to have that. Oops. And then I'm going to have Folium, right? So in total, that's about it. That's just the two things there, pandas and Folium. So I'm going to save that, and you will see that the page is going to be starting to reboot, because every time you save it, it tries to reboot it. And now in the body, I'm just going to create a div to hold my content, right? You can call it content, you can call it container, you can call it whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to say div, and within it, I'm just going to, maybe I should call it Folium, right? It could be that, you could just call it map, whatever, right? And you can give it a bit of style. So the style is really just something to sort of control that I want this to be 100%, because I want, you know, imagine this is a data science project, and I just only want the whole map to take up the whole screen itself. I don't want anything else. There's nothing else. I just want to visualize, let's say, the effect of the pandemic or the post-pandemic or long COVID, whatever you want to see, you know, some sort of visualization, and you want it to take the full width of your screen. So I'm gonna have that, and I'm gonna have height as 100% as well, right? So you've learned about this before, so this is nothing new. You could have your PyScript right here now. This, because it concerns what happens in the body, I'm going to put them within the body. So I'm going to say PyScript, and I'm going to close the tag right now, and whoops, and I want it to be, I want whatever I do here to output to this ID equals to map. So I'm going to say output equals to and map. So this is going to say whatever that happens in here, just take that and then feed that back into this div, which is ID equals to map. All right. And now what do we want to do? Now, if you import pandas and Folium, you probably, if you declare them as dependencies, you probably want to import them, because otherwise, why else are you going to do that, right? So let's go ahead and just import Folium, and let's import pandas. I think they're going to complain about the whole indentation, so I'm just gonna not do that now. Or I could just build it out into a script, separate script. That's also okay. And then what am I gonna do next? I'm also gonna try and read off the internet for some of the data, so I'm gonna need that later. Let's just create a simple Folium map just to see how things looks like, right? I'm gonna say m equals to, and I'm gonna say Folium.map, and I'm gonna have a location. For now, I'm not gonna put anything in there because I want to show you how I'm gonna usually do that. And I'm gonna just say zoom start equals to, I don't know, 10 maybe, some random numbers right now, and that's about it. And then you just print m. Okay. Now location itself is where you specify the longitude and the latitude. Now how do I find the longitude and latitude? Well, generally I just Google them, honestly, right? So let me open up my browser right now, and if I type in a, for example, I work in Menara Standard Chartered. It's a place in Jakarta. And this is the postal code of the office building itself. So what I do is I just type that in, and I type longitude, latitude, and I look at what the longitude, latitude is, and this is south, so I'm going to add a negative in front of it, and that's kind of how I get it. So I'm just going to go in here, and the location, I'm going to change that to negative 6.2238, like this, and I'm going to just give a 106.8193, and that's it. So I just Google that up. For you, just have to look at your postal code, put it into Google, and just type longitude, latitude. You should see the coordinates for that, and take the copy the coordinates and then paste that in here. And I'm going to save all of this. I'm going to go back to my browser. Let's take a look at what happens here. And voila, there is my map. So I see my Jakarta. I need to zoom in a little bit closer, so I'm going to change the zoom start to maybe something like 12. So I'm going to save that, and it's going to reload the whole thing. So zoom start is the parameter that you control to show how much the level of zoom you need, you want in here. So level zoom equals to 12. Now it's a lot closer, and you could use your mouse or your scroller, or you could just hit Control on the keyboard and just zoom in, and I can see a lot of I can see details. Actually, let me tell you where I live. I live around this area. Actually, let me show you. Yeah, this is kind of where I live, and so this is my apartment, and this is where I usually do my workout. I usually run around this. It's called the stadium Gelora Boom Kernel. This is the name of the stadium, and this is where I usually have my dinner. So this is kind of where I usually eat. But look at how fast it is. Look at how easy it is in my code. From top to bottom, I have my head, I have my set up my dependencies, and then I have, of course, I want to bring the PyScript in there, so I have my PyScript.js, PyScript.css, and I have my title, I have my div, and that's it. Just, what is it? 2 lines of code. If you don't include the import statements, that's 2 lines of code. In fact, you could just do Folium.map, you could also do that. But anyway, that's kind of the get started. Now let's bring it up a notch and let's do something cooler with it, right? Now suppose I have some remote data sources and I already have them on my GitHub. So if you, and I live in Indonesia, so I'm using Indonesia, but later I'll use a US data set. So if you, for those of you who live in the US, live in the States, you will have that as well. And sort of, I'm gonna so incrementally change up the demo a little bit, but later we're gonna look at some US examples, okay? So for now, I'm gonna use an Indonesian sort of the Geospatial data right now. And I'm gonna first go ahead and bring in pandas. I have pandas. I'm gonna also say import JSON because I will need to work with JSON because this is the data source, and you can tell just by looking at it that this is kind of a JSON data structure. I'm gonna copy the link right here, and this is what we're gonna do. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna say URL and just pass the URL in there, right? So this is I'm gonna paste off this link in the description anyway, so don't worry about that. And then I'm gonna go ahead and say read that in for me. Now the way you read something remotely from using the PyScript model is that you're gonna go ahead and use the open URL, so you need to import that in as well. So you're gonna say import from Pyodite. Pyodite is kind of under the hood, that's what it is doing, right? So you look at all of this thing that PyScript is providing, is giving you. Pyodite is actually kind of the engine behind it. So I'm gonna say HTTP import open URL. That's kind of how you sort of read data sources remotely, right? So from pyodite.http import open URL. And what we're gonna do next is we're gonna try and take a look at the data, and we have, this is the provinces, all the provinces, this is all the data. You see the Aceh, you see Jakarta. If I search Jakarta, you should see it, and I don't have to worry about that right now. All I need to do is to read that in, all right? And to read that in, let's just go ahead and say provinces, or I'm gonna say provinces JSON, right? Just to be a bit more explicit, I'm gonna say .load. And what do I want to load? I want to first open URL and pass this in. So this is going to be passed into the open URL, and that's kind of how I load it. Without this whole PyScript thing, you typically probably used to just writing that in like that, right? But with PyScript, you have to go through this open URL method for you to be able to establish this HTTP connection and then read that thing in there. So we just gonna stick to the first one like that. So just JSON.load and an open URL, and then we want to pass the URL in there. And then I'm also gonna go ahead and bring in another kind of a second data set. So this is the square meter. So I want to have a nice choropleth showing the colors based on the amount, let's say the density of each province. I can color that. I can color based on the number of COVID cases, the number of election turnout rate, all of those things. I can color based on that. So it's a very simple choropleth, and I'm gonna use the square meter. So how big is the province itself? And I have the other data in here as well. So I'm just gonna copy that. And this one, I could go ahead and just get URL2. I can do that. In fact, let's probably not worry about it. Just go ahead and read that in already directly. So I'm gonna just say square meter because this is what I want. I want a square meter, which is here, right? In km square km, right? Km squared. So kilometers. For those of you who are not in the US, kilometers is, I mean, for those of you who are in the US, kilometers is kind of how we measure distance. And so we're gonna say go ahead and do pd.readcsv. And because this is a CSV format, I know that because if I look at the end of it, it's basically just a .csv, and you can see that it's actually comma separated anyway. So we're gonna say pd.readcsv, and again, you can't just put in the URL. I know in Jupyter Notebook or whatever, you're gonna probably be used to doing that, but you again need to go through the open URL method. So let's make sure we do that. Extra one, open URL, and now we pass that in, okay? If you want it to be nice and tidy, then you can just go ahead and just maybe have this as URL provinces, for example, and then change this to URL provinces, and then this is just URL, and this is the square meter data set, and pass that in. Then now you don't have to pass all of this in anymore, but just remove all of them, and you just have to say URL square meter. It's up to you if you want it to be a little bit tidier, probably, right? And one thing I haven't yet to show you is if at this point, let me go back to my interactive map. Oh, because I forgot about PD, import pandas as PD, that's how I got that. All right. Another thing I can show you is you can also actually specify your own tiles. So for example, I could set up a tiles and I can pass in a few things here. Now there are a few other options here. Maybe if you use if you have done any kind of like leaflet or any kind of like this kind of visualization before, you know this already. But for those of you who don't, well, you can actually have a different kind of tiles. I think the default is the OpenStreetMap, but you can have the Stamen terrain, Stamen toner, map box, bright, or all kind of tiles. So for example, let me show you what it looks like. If I say Stamen terrain, let me just save that. All right, this is kind of how it looks like. If we zoom in, right, this is kind of how it looks like. Doesn't look too bad. I think it looks quite okay, right? Stamen. And if you want a slightly different look, you can experiment with that. For example, you can also do something like toner. So we can change this to toner, Stamen toner, and save that. And now this is how it looks like, just a nice black and white, kind of maybe good for printing if you need to print that out. All right. And also, I don't want to zoom out that far now. I want to zoom in a little bit closer. So I'm not going to have this as 12. I'm going to have this as 6. In fact, just cut it by half. You can go all the way down to 3, to 4, to 1, up to you, right? So try and experiment. This is kind of experimental. It's kind of like how data visualization usually works anyway, is that when you develop your visualization, that's kind of what you do. But if you want to zoom in a little bit more, you change that, right? So if I wanted to go a little bit closer, a little bit more zoom in, then you change the value to be higher. I'm gonna keep it at 6. That's kind of where I want it to be now. And then what we're gonna do is that before we actually print out the M, I'm gonna add go ahead and add my Choropleths. So the way I do that is I'm gonna say Folium dot Choropleths. Maybe I should take away the sidebar. And I'm gonna have a few things that I need to specify in here. Now the first thing I want to specify is the geodata. So where did the geodata come from? And the geodata is something that I already have up here. So that's provinces JSON. So I'm gonna say provinces JSON, right? And then the next one I want to have is I want to give a name to this layer. So I want to call it square meter, because that's what I'm going to call it by provinces. All right. And then I'm going to have now the data. Now the difference between geodata and the data is the data itself is what gives this Choropleth the actual color itself. The geodata is kind of what is the underlying geodata that it should use. So data is kind of the SQM here. Now let me just show you what it is, just to remind you how it looks like, right? So if you look at the CSV itself, you will see that there are a few columns, right? There's the code province, and then there's the code pattern, there's the area, there's the quota. So we actually only need the area and we need the province, because that's what I want to call it by. All right, so I'm gonna actually specify that in here as well. I'm gonna say columns, right? And it's gonna be an array of 2 things. So it's gonna be province, which is the name of the column, and you want to spell it correctly, and area. So A is not capitalized, but then K is capitalized, and then M, and then 2, right? So you want to name it exactly you have as you have it in the CSV. And I'm gonna put a comma next to it, and I want to join that on somewhere. So what is the key to join them on? So if I take a look at my other JSON file now, just click on that one, right? I see that I could join them based on the name one, which is under the properties. So I have the type, I have the properties, which is here. Then from here I go to name one, right? And that would give me, for example, Aceh. And if I look at Aceh, that's the same as this one. So there's a Sumatra, Sumatra Utara, Sumatra Barat, Riau, Jambi, Sumatra, Selatan, Bengkulu. So that is the one that I want to join on. This takes a little bit of experimentation. So if you only spend a bit of time to just look at your data, you need to do that, absolutely do that, right? So I'm gonna say key on, and that is gonna, let me name it correctly. Let me make sure again. So if I go and take a look at this one, it says this is the feature, all right? So features, okay, so let me put it properly here. So feature.properties, okay, so it needs to be, it's case sensitive, by the way. If your properties is spelled P without capitalized P, you don't want to do that. And then now name one is capitalized, right? So I want to say name one underscore. So it's case sensitive. So make sure that that's the exact one that you see on the CSV. And I'm going to put a comma. And then now it's just kind of like, what do you want to fill the color by? So I'm going to just, I know what I want to fill it by. You can choose a different color palette. That's up to you. I'm going to say yellow, green, right? And then I'm going to fill opacity. I'm going to give it a little bit of a, I don't want it to be completely 1. I want it to be slightly a bit transparent. So 0.7 alpha. And then I'm going to give it a bit of line opacity as well. And this is just going to be 0.2. So it's a very, very soft, just barely there. All right. And that's kind of it, actually. I want to add all of this to my map. And where is my map? This one. So what do I name it? I name it M. Kind of a convention, really. So we just have to say add to M. Okay, if you name it something else, then you want to change that accordingly. And I'm going to save all of that. Okay, now let's go back and take a look at what we have there. And now we have it. This is the whole of Indonesia. So you have the Indonesia, you have the different provinces, and you can see the provinces. This one is a little bit darker because this is all based on a square meter. So if the square meter, if this is a really large area, then you will have a darker green. If not, it's a lighter green. Obviously, you can change this as well. And you can zoom in and zoom out and see, you know, well, how does it look like if you zoom in. This is Sulawesi, this is where my wife is from, and this is Papua New Guinea. So you can take a look at all of the colors. Now let me show you how it reacts to a different tiles, for example, right? For example, if I take toner and save that, and you see now the colors look a little bit different now because of the underlying, the layer, the colors, here it is, right? So now it's black, but because it's a black and white, right? Remember, toner is the black and white. It's kind of like the old school printer stuff. But now I look at the colors and it still looks pretty good, right? It still looks pretty good. So there's a green, there's a dark green. This is a landmass, huge, and there are some that are smaller. So you can see all of this. So you can sort of play around with that and sort of find something that you like, all right? So if you want that, you can stick to that. I also want to show you another thing that you can do with Folium as well, and you can also have that directly in your web app since you're building this thing already. So the other thing you can do is to add a layer control. So you can say Folium.layer control and L capital control C capital, and then that is gonna give it the a control layer that's gonna show up somewhere here around the top right in the browser, in your web app. It's gonna show up in the top right that allows somebody to control the layer and like, oh, I want to see this, I don't want to see that, and they can hide this and hide that, right? So again, you want to do the same thing here. Remember how you did the add to map, so you want to do that as well. So let's go ahead and bring this all the way to the bottom around this area, and I want to just say add to map, just kind of like what I'm doing here, just the add to am thing. Just gonna save that, and actually we don't need the am to be indented, so let's fix that. Save all of that, and now we have an extra this layer control. So if we can now toggle that. Okay, now that's there's no Choropleths, but if you want to toggle that back on, you see the effect there, right? So it looks pretty good. It looks pretty good. You can zoom out a little bit more and zoom in. You can see it's kind of nice, right? It's kind of fun. You can play around with that. And this the name of the layer, this SQ square meter. So this is actually not square meter. This is, I think, km square. So I want to change that as well. So I want to say km square. All right. So fix that, but that's controlled in the name. All right. So let's save that, and now you have a pretty good looking map. And you can go ahead and play around with it a little bit more. I'm going to show you one more example, and then we're gonna I'm gonna leave you with that. So if you're trying to work with this using a US data set, you can just use the one that is some free data. And I'm gonna go and change a couple of things. So instead of URL provinces, I'm gonna just hit on Control D and just change that to URL. And now I'm just gonna remove all of this, and I'm gonna pass in another one here. So I'm gonna set this US states.json. And let's not name it URL. Let's call it states geo. Right? Yeah, let's not name it. Let's call it states geo because that's a state data set. And remove this state geo. And we're gonna let me just show you what a data set looks like. But it looks very similar. Okay, so just copy that and come back in here. Paste this in JSON. So this is how it looks like. Very similar. All right. But then now you have the Alabama, you have Alaska, you have sort of like Florida and Texas and all that. Yeah, I don't live in the US, but you see California, right? Cool. So very similar stuff. And what about unemployment? Now unemployment is gonna look really similar, so I'm gonna copy off that, and I'm gonna say this is state unemployment, and I want to pass in the URL as well, so it's gonna be the same URL, except it won't be US state. It's gonna be US underscore unemployment October 2012.csv, right? So that's the data that I find. I mean, you can find some other data sets. I mean, something more recent, all right? 2012 is 10 years ago. And we have state geo, we have state and unemployment. And what do we want? We want to basically, we don't need these two anymore, but we're going to use the same technique, which is to use the open URL stuff. So I'm going to say state data. Okay, and that's gonna just be pd.readcsv. And remember, you can't just pass in the URL like that. What you need to do is to just use the open URL, kind of what you learned already, and you want to put in the state unemployment. So I want to say state unemployment. This is what you name it. So state unemployment. All right, and then you want to have geo.json as well. So I want to say geo.json, And what is this? This is just the same thing. You can say json.loads, and again, you can pass in the same thing. You want to use the open URL method. So do open URL, and you want to say state Joe. Then what do we want? You want to say .read. All right. So now you have state data. You have Joe JSON. You want to change the location. Obviously, this is not going to be relevant because this is Indonesia. You want to have it in US. So I found a location in the US, just 48 -102. And zoom is going to be not so zoom in because this is kind of like visualizing the whole unemployment for the whole of US. So that it makes no sense to zoom in on a small city or a small town somewhere in Alabama. It doesn't make sense to do that. You want to actually zoom out a little bit more. So I'm going to cut it by half again. So from 6 to 3. I can keep this house. You can remove it if you want to, right? And then now if you look at the data, so let me go into unemployment data. So that's this one. So I'm gonna copy that. Oops. Copy that. Get back into my browser. Paste that. Now you see that there is a state and there's an unemployment. So I don't need to select. Just now in the earlier example, I have multiple columns. I'm selecting 2 of them. I said I want to show these 2 of them, right? But in here there's only 2 of them anyway. So you should be very straightforward what to change. So you want to remove the columns here and replace them accordingly. So you want to have state and you name them unemployment. So you want to have that unemployment there as well, right? What about geodata? Geodata, this is not going to be that anymore. It's going to be GeoJSON. Okay, again, that's just the JSON for the Geo data for the US, the country US. And then this is just going to be unemployment 2012, right? What about the data? Data, what do you name it? You name it state_data. So I want to change that as well. All right. And the rest looks about, oh, key on. All right, so key on. Let's take a look at the first data here. So this is not the one. Just copy that. Paste this in. And what do we have? Now you want to match it with the state itself. Though the state looks like AL, AK, AZ. So that's the abbreviation. So which one do you have here? So let's see. We have the ID here, right? So it's not even under properties. It's right outside of properties. So you want to remove the properties because it's not even within properties, and it's not even called name1 anymore. It's actually called ID. So let's change that to feature.id. The rest could stay the same. Really it's the same thing. Just save it, and let's go back to our map. Oh, I think a good thing to do is to maybe add one thing here. Line opacity, right? Let's call it legend name. Give it a legend name, and we're gonna call it unemployment rate. In terms of percentages, 2012. Somewhere like that. Okay, let's save that. And now there you have it. All right. So if you zoom in, you see there are different unemployment rates, and you can look at all of the different zoom levels and play around with the different zoom levels. But you can also have that toggle here to sort of show hide and show. So that's pretty cool, right? And all of this is done using using PyScript without you actually having to bring in JavaScript or to do any kind of work in JavaScript. It's just all in there. And you have a nice map as well here coming up showing you there. You can obviously go ahead and change this and play with this a bit more and try and give it your own style. But I think that's kind of the whole point of that, because up to this point, this is a very common scenario. A lot of data scientists or data analysts or anyone who work in data visualization in general, you're going to be asked to do this at some point. And in the past, this is not the most straightforward task, because you want to actually have to interface with JavaScript and then bring in the Leaflet and then do all of these things. And if you use Shiny, you know how to hook that up with Shiny, and you use Flask, you hook that with Flask. But right now with PyScript, it just makes this so much simpler, and we can go ahead and just deploy all of that. So let me go ahead now and just do a git add, git commit, and I'm gonna say insert update index.html, and I can say git push origin main. All right. And now that it's done, I could go back to my GitHub. Go to my repo, click on that. So I have the index.html. So what I need to do is to go into settings, and I could go into pages I'm looking for, and I could just set it up, say main, save, and I could just open this in a new tab, and I'll just wait for it to refresh. It takes about 2 to 3 minutes. And so sure enough, if you give it a bit of time and you can refresh it when it's done running, you should see everything that you just built deployed. So this takes us what, 20 minutes? it's pretty amazing to get to this point in 20 minutes, right? So we have that, and we can zoom in, we can play around with that. And if you're from Indonesia, from this part of the world, you could change that to Indonesia. I'll show you the example, but I go back to US because I think still a lot of people relate to the US a lot more than they can relate to Indonesia. But it's up to you. And if you have other kind of map you want to work with, go ahead and give it a try. And that's all I have time for today. I think for the amount of work you put in and for the results you get, I think there's a lot of value here, especially for anyone who have to do this kind of like map visualization anyway. So I hope you enjoy this episode, this part 5 of the PyScript tutorial series, and I'll see you in a future episode and talk about something else that I find interesting. Have a nice day wherever you're at, and I'll see you again.